Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe. Hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon. We've made it through another week. If you are tuning in live here on Behance, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. If you're tuning in on Twitter, hi Twitter friends. If you do want to chat along, definitely head over to behance.net/Adobe Live. We've got Umacorn and Gal and Arif, Gareth, Masayu, and Wade. Great to see all of you. Thanks so much to Andrew, who just wrapped up the Illustrator Daily Creative Challenge. Always fun watching Andrew do his magic, dress up in all sorts of fun costumes. It's a good time. Laura and Dee, great to see you as well. Alrighty, so Masterclass number 80. Amazing, we've made it this far. Let's go ahead and hop over my screen and we're going to get going. So, today, we're going to be designing a space, more specifically, a James Webb telescope-inspired landing page. And you may have seen this. If you follow me on Instagram, definitely recommend you follow me over there. I'm going to be posting a lot more reels, short tips and tricks on Instagram, so give me a follow over there when you get a chance. But I posted this about a week ago, and it's a little bit of a preview of what we're going to be doing today. We're also going to be incorporating video into this, which is going to be kind of fun. We're going to be putting some video into this James Webb telescope, into the mirrors of the telescope that we're going to be designing using all sorts of styles and all sorts of fun stuff. So if anyone has questions throughout this stream, definitely throw them in the chat. As a reminder, these streams are a little bit more in depth than the typical ones. But if you are new to Adobe XD and you want to learn, from the beginning, we do host daily challenges Monday to Friday, which is wonderful for just getting started in XD. I also have some great tutorials on YouTube as well. All right, let's go ahead and hop over to Adobe XD. Let's get going. So, considering this is going to be a web-based landing page, we're gonna wanna start with a web-based preset. And we have a few presets here. Web 1920, 1366, 1280. Let's go big today. We're gonna go 1920 by 1080. We're gonna launch that. And here's our first artboard. Alrighty, so I'm gonna name this landing page, just so things are nice and organized. And Umacorn is on it with the boops already. Chris, great to see you. And we've got Paul watching from Idaho. Great to see all of you in the chat today. All right, so since this is space, if you ever looked up into the stars and if you ever been to space, I know some people have. I unfortunately have not. Maybe one day. Probably not, but maybe one day. It's very dark up there. So naturally, we're going to go a little bit darker with this landing page. And I'm going to start with a nice background. Now, I think what would be kind of cool is to have in the background some stars. Now, if I were to go ahead and grab my rectangle and draw a rectangle across this artboard, right? And then switch over to Finder or Explore on Windows, I have a lot of images of stars from Adobe Stock. There's also a free section on Adobe Stock. Let me actually hop over there just for a moment. So if you go to stock.adobe.com/free, you can search for things like stars, or they also have free videos, which is wonderful as well. A ton of vector images, but all these assets are completely free. Stars, 20,700 free assets for stars, which is great, right? Not if the sun is out. You're funny, Wade. It's a good point, sort of, if you're looking at surface, but out, away from the sun, very dark, right? So anyways, if I were to grab this image here and drag it into XD, right? It's gonna mask that image really nicely. But what we're gonna notice, especially once we start adding content on top of it, is, even though it's a fairly dark image, there are spurts of color. There's some blue, there's some brighter areas, there's some darker areas. So it's going to be a little bit difficult to add some content, especially text. It might be a little bit difficult to read that. So what we want to do is experiment with blend modes, right? So if I go ahead and select the artboard by clicking on the label right at the top, I can change the artboard color. Now, we're not going to really see much when we're doing this, right? So let me actually go ahead and hide the image. And I'm going to choose, let's say, a linear gradient. We could do a solid gradient, we could do a radial gradient, completely up to you. But let's go for, maybe we'll do a bit brighter at the top, right? So we'll do something like this at the top, and it's not going to look that great right now, but the point of this is we want it to interact with that image that we just added. Now, if I go a little bit darker towards the bottom, it's an okay gradient. If this gradient was standing on its own and going to be completely visible like this, I probably wouldn't do this. But what we're going to do is there we go, is we're going to reveal this image and then experiment with blend modes, which will allow this image to blend nicely with that gradient in the background. So something like soft light. Not bad, right? Overlay, it'll allow more of those vibrant colors to come through. Also not bad. But if we're going to have additional elements that are a little bit more vibrant, might be a touch difficult. So I think something like soft light could certainly work. You can also try something like screen or multiply, depends on the project, but I think for this, soft light looks pretty good. As we start adding additional elements, we may want to go back and make some tweaks to this, but for now, looks pretty good. Now, at the top of this landing page, we're going to want a few things. The most important are some links and possibly the logo. Now, we could just grab the NASA logo and pop it in here. It's fair use because it's a government agency, but let's actually design one just for fun, right? So right here at the top, what I'm going to do is grab my good old ellipse tool, draw one out, and just to modernize it a little bit. We don't want to go too far, but I'm going to add a slight linear gradient to this particular ellipse, and maybe at the top it'll be a little bit of a darker blue, and then towards the bottom we might brighten it up just a touch to add almost like a look of a sky, almost like a horizon in there, right? Very subtle. And then on top of this, we're going to want the actual or some sort of NASA logo or, the words, the typeface, right? Now, I experimented with a ton of different typefaces for this project, but on Adobe Fonts, fonts.adobe.com, there's a typeface called NASA-lization. NASA-lization. It's a tongue twister, but it's perfect for this because if you go ahead right over here and type in some sample text like NASA, look at that. Perfect, right? So I did go ahead and activate this font, which is wonderful, and it's synced right over. So I can grab my text tool, shortcut key T, type out NASA. I'm going to change the color to white, make it a little bit bigger. And then the most important part is we want to change the typeface to that NASA-lization right there. And I'm going to pop it somewhere in the center. Maybe make it a little bit larger. Perfect. Now, on the actual official NASA logo, there are these red kind of waves that kind of move around the logo, right? I don't have the logo up at the moment, but we can, simulate something to that effect using the pen tool. So if I grab the pen tool, shortcut key P, we can do something like this, right? We can click and maybe have a little bit of a curve here, and then that will curve up to this area here, right? Something like that. And then maybe I can have it curve a little bit down, back around here, and then we might want it to curve up. Now, you're going to notice if I click and drag, the point at the top is also going to be affected, but if I hold down my Alter option, let me undo that. Whoops. It broke it. Let me do this again. Right, click and drag to make a curve. We'll do the same thing over here. Like that. And then if I hold down Alter option, I can just affect that curve if I wanted to, right? It's not the nicest thing in the world, but it's going to get us there a little bit. I can hold down Alter option, adjust this as well, and just kind of make these changes. Or I can just not hold down Alter option and have something like this. Now, if I go ahead and change this color to a red, we can start to kind of see where we're going. It's not great, right? So I'm going to make some additional change. I'm going to pull this back a little bit so the curve isn't as drastic. And just kind of tweak this until I'm liking this initial curve. We're going to have one more curve after this. Something like that, right? And we can definitely go back later on and make some changes because this point, this area here, not great. Another thing you want to definitely take a look at are how your colors interact with each other. If we take a look at this right now, and I'm sure a lot of you can see this on the stream, this particular red against this particular blue, just not working that great, right? So I might want to maybe darken it a little bit, or consider darkening the blue in the background. So the color at the bottom, I might want to darken and maybe shift up a little bit. And then since we're going for that gradient, I might want to shift the top color as well. So it's still not perfect, but all of a sudden that red is a little bit easier to look at back there. And then there is one more curve behind the logo. Well, in this case, in the official logo, it's actually on top, but I want one kind of behind it, just to give it an interesting look. So I'm going to duplicate this down, rotate it, maybe 15, maybe 10 degrees, position it somewhere in this area here. Then I can go ahead and double click and make some changes. Now, this part of the logo right in here is likely not going to be seen, right? So I'm not too concerned about what that looks like, but I do want it to kind of close in this area here, right? And I do want to make sure that this looks nice and curvy. Now, I do want to make sure that it's cut out, but I don't want it to just, because what I can do is just kind of move it right behind, right? But I want a little bit of a cutout. So I'm going to actually grab this ellipse here, duplicate it, make sure it's on top of that newly created shape, make it a little bit larger, and then I'm going to make sure to select both of them. So I have the newly created ellipse and that curve at the bottom selected, and I'm going to use the Boolean options at the top right-hand corner to subtract, which is going to add a nice little cutout down there, right? Now what I think I should definitely do before I do that is make sure these curves are in place, because I want them kind of right in this area here. And now we can do the exact same thing, cut that out, and now we have a nice cutout over here. And we're definitely seeing that this curve at the top, not the nicest looking curve, right? So I'm just going to make some changes to it. And the one at the back, I might also want to darken, so it looks like there's a little bit of a bevel, right? And it's also behind it, so there could be, a little bit of a shadow as well. Again, not the nicest looking curve. I would definitely spend a little bit more time on it, but here we go. Now, just, as a Martha Stewart moment, I'm going to actually hop over to another document very quickly. I'm going to steal the logo that I spent a little bit more time on and pop it in here. There we go. Fernando's asking, what's the point of this live? It's a good question, Fernando. Mostly so I can interact and answer questions with the viewers like yourself. It's definitely going to be available afterwards as an on-demand video. But I love connecting with the community, answering questions, all sorts of fun stuff like that, right? There we go. All right, so we have our logo at the top looking pretty good. Now, the next thing we're going to want, beside the logo on both sides, now, of course, we could put the logo over here to the left, but I think it looks kind of fun right in the center. We want some links. So, for example, we might want to link permissions so that a viewer can come to this page, click on missions, and see all the different missions that NASA is currently taking part in. Now, we previously used the NASAization typeface, right? And it looks okay. But as we're going to get smaller and smaller, because links shouldn't be massive, right? They should be, somewhere in this range here. It's going to be a little bit more difficult to see. Definitely a nice typeface, a little bit difficult to see. So we might want to, revert back to something a little bit more traditional. Something like Futura, right? Futura PT. And we might want to bold it, maybe demi-bold. Still has some nice qualities to it, but it's a lot easier to see when you are zoomed out. If I go ahead and launch the preview at the top, we can definitely see it. Now we can consider going bold or demi-bold, medium. I wouldn't go much lower than, medium. I definitely wouldn't do light, because then it could be very difficult to see, right? So I think we're going to stick with demi. We might want missions. We might want something like galleries, maybe NASA TV, things like that, right? Now, one thing we might want to do is to make our life a little bit easier when we are setting these links up, placing them into a group and turning a stack on. So if I undo this, I'm going to go ahead and select this link text layer right here. I'm going to pop it into a group, Command-Control-G, and I'm going to call this links. And then over within the properties inspector to the right, I can enable a stack, just like that. and it will default to a horizontal stack because there's only one object in it, which is exactly what I want, right? So if I double click in here to select this text layer, I can now duplicate, Command and Control D. It's going to pop another text layer over to the right, and then I can hover in between and adjust the spacing if I want to, but I'm going to leave that for a little bit later. And I'll type out galleries, and then one more, NASA TV. Now, I was thinking a lot about how to separate these links. Now, of course, they don't necessarily have to be separated. We could just leave them as is, like this, right? Maybe I'll line it up with the logo, right? I can also drag a guide out from the top. We could certainly leave it like this. We could separate them a little bit more, and it'll certainly be fine, right? Fernando's asking about the font. Yes, so that was downloaded over at fonts.adobe.com. It's called the NASA-lization typeface. It's a tongue twister. So again, I could just leave them as this, as is. Looks fine. But I think it could be fun to incorporate a little bit of space geekiness into this. So maybe in between all of these different text layers, we could possibly maybe put little planets. And, you know, they don't have to be very in-depth and stylized, but maybe just little ellipses that kind of correspond to the different planets in order, right? So if I double click and grab my ellipse, I'll just drag out a tiny little circle, right? Place that in there. And the first one would be Mercury. Now, Mercury isn't, there's not much color to it, right? So I'll just do something like this. Now, a lot of these planets, you know, have a very similar color scheme, right? And I don't know the exact color of Mercury, but it's something, you know, kind of boring. Mercury is kind of boring. And then we have Venus. Now, that's a little bit more exciting because there's a lot of, you know, orange and toxic clouds up there. I wouldn't recommend going to Venus. So we'll shift it a little bit more orange. Now, the next planet, Earth, right? Blue. Kind of works, right? Now, of course, we want to make sure that we have our group selected and we have all of our spacing set up. So let's do something like, I don't know, 48. Could look good. Maybe even 56. Bump it up a little bit more. And make sure to position this over to the left. We might actually even want to go a little bit more, but we'll see. And then I'm going to duplicate this over to the right so that we can add some additional links over there. And we might want something like downloads. And one of the great things about using stacks is that as I was typing and making those changes to those text layers, all the other layers beside it were, you know, shifting really nicely. And then the next planet would be Mars. And that is certainly red. There's a few rovers on Mars right now. And then maybe we might want something like STEM education. And we'll shift this one a little bit as well. And then finally, we might want one more that would be about. Now, we're not going to have enough little dots for all the planets. We certainly could add some additional links, but to keep it nice and simple, we will leave it as is. All right, so I'm going to make sure to group all these layers here and just pop them into, and name this nav, and we're good to go. All right, so we have our nav bar at the top looking pretty good. I would definitely make some changes to this at some point, but it's looking pretty good. Now, one thing we want to focus on this particular landing page is the James Webb Telescope, which recently launched and seems to be going very well. I feel like I've been following the progress of this telescope half my life, which is probably not inaccurate considering it's been in development for a long time, a lot of delays. It's finally up there, almost to its target orbit, but not there yet. But what we might want to do is have like a nice big header, which, you know, the tagline for the James Webb Telescope is Unfold the Universe. And then maybe over to the right, we may want to recreate what those mirrors look like. And that's where we're going to incorporate some video directly into this landing page. Now, starting off with the header, we want to get a little bit fancy with this. We want to use some cool typefaces, also from Adobe stock. So if we do something like Unfold the, right? Make this nice and large because this is a nice big header. Now, of course, we could continue with something like Futura. We could go back to our NASA-lization. It's fine, but I want to get a little bit fancier with this. And I think something like Lust is an interesting typeface. Definitely not for your everyday use, but it's got some fun qualities to it. It's very elegant. It's got some nice, curves down here. It's kind of fun. Now, one thing I might want to do is get a little bit creative with the way that this text is laid out. If you take a look here, if I duplicate this down, right, we have a little bit of repetition. We have, where'd the chat go? I lost my chat. Here we go. So we have unfold the on the first line, and we have universe on the second line. And we have this U that's very repetitive. It looks a little bit strange. So what I think would be interesting is to actually get rid of the U on both of these text layers and just have one U that connects both of these. So if I duplicate this somewhere, I'll type out U, and we may not necessarily need the display italic. We can go back to either display or just regular, or we can stick with display italic, whatever works, right? But we definitely want to make sure that this is nice and large. I'm going to make sure to line it up. Let me actually drag out a guide here. All right. And then place this somewhere in this area here. Now, it's looking a little bit thin. If we take a look right in this area here, it's a little bit thin in there. Now, we could convert this to a path and, shift things around a little bit and thicken it up a touch. Or what we can do, we can actually utilize a border. So if we have this text layer selected, if I go ahead and turn a border on within the Properties Inspector, I'm going to change the color to white, and then just bump this up until it's a little bit thicker. Something like 8 could do the trick. And then what I want to do is make sure that all of this is lining up really nicely. So I kind of want the N to kind of hug the curve of this U at the top. And then I think it could be kind of interesting, considering the bottom of this F is kind of sticking down and very curvy. It could be fun to incorporate that into the word universe at the bottom, where the ellipse of the I is. So I might need to make this a little bit smaller. So we have about 132 up here for this text layer. I might want to go a little bit smaller. Let's try about 124. And then see if I can position it. Ooh, there we go. Right about there, right? That could be interesting. Maybe I can also add a period. Boop. And now we're getting somewhere, right? And I might want to just kind of shift this a little bit, make this a bit smaller so it lines up. Let me drag out a guide again. There we go. Perfect. So now we have this nice, very stylized header at the top. I will mention that it's a little bit difficult to read if you are kind of zoomed out a little bit, but I feel that for the majority of people landing on this website who are familiar with NASA, familiar with the James Webb Telescope, they'll probably understand it and they'll probably be able to read it. But of course, this is where user testing comes into play. Definitely get this in the hands of your users. Make sure that they can all read it properly. If not, you might have to make some changes. But I'm pretty happy with the way this is looking. It's kind of fun. I'm going to make sure to group it and just call this unfold. All right, so now the fun begins, right? Right over here to the right, we want to introduce the telescope. And we want to kind of show off the big magical mirrors that many of us have definitely seen in videos and photos and all that fun stuff. So what I want to do is recreate those mirrors using layers and styles. So if I grab my polygon tool from the tools bar to the left, shortcut key Y, I am going to drag one out. Laura's saying, soon there is a 100th Masterclass anniversary. 20 more to go. I don't know what I'm going to do for the 100th. If anyone has suggestions, send me a tweet at Pinsky, and we'll figure something fun out. All right, so for the mirrors, there are, I believe, 6 sides to these mirrors. And I'm going to round out the corners ever so slightly. I want to do something like this because the mirrors are fairly sharp, but just to give a little bit of style, maybe about 2, something in that area there. And then in terms of styling of this particular mirror, we're going to add a few extra layers on top of this to help style it. So we're going to keep this fairly simple. We're going to choose a color, something like this. This is not a nice looking color, but we're going to add a gradient on top that'll allow the entire mirror to kind of fade, right? So we'll do something like that. Maybe we'll add a bit of a border on this so it has a little bit of a bevel. I'm going to drop the opacity. Bump it up in size a little bit, maybe to about 3. And then I might want a little bit of an inner shadow. And this is going to actually add a little bit of a highlight to this particular mirror. They're very shiny, right? Umacorn saying mustard yellow. It does look like a bit of a mustard yellow, but it's going to look a lot nicer once we add a gradient on top of it. So we want to add an inner shadow, but it's going to be more of a highlight. So we're going to add a little bit of white, a little bit of yellow at the top. Let's bump it to 100%. But we don't want this very blurry kind of inner shadow that we have now. We actually want to, let's say, bump the X over to the left, so it's kind of coming from the right, right? Right. And then we're going to do something like maybe just 1 at the top, so it just grazes that top. But the most important thing is we want to take the blur value, which is right down here, all the way down to 0. So we have a little bit of a highlight up there. Now, of course, we definitely tweak this a touch until it looks somewhat okay. Bump this down a little bit. Now, when you're designing so zoomed in like this, it's going to look a little bit strange. But once we zoom out, it's going to look a little bit better. But of course, we can always tweak this as we go. Right? So it just adds a little bit of a highlight at the top and on the side as well. Now, of course, there are a lot of mirrors on this telescope, right? So we definitely want to make sure to duplicate these. So I'm going to hold down my Alter option over here. I'm going to make sure it lines up nicely. Move it behind. Over on this side. Right? So now we have 3 of them looking pretty good. And I can start, duplicating. Or actually, let me duplicate one more down here. Essentially what I want to do is create the top section, and we can duplicate downwards just to make our life a little bit easier. Oh no, buffering? Oh, I hope we're not doing this buffering thing again. We had a lot of buffering issues 2 weeks ago. I think I fixed it, but I guess we'll see. No, all fine, no, okay. Maybe it's just Umacorn. Something like that, and then we can duplicate one over this way. Duplicate one over again. And I believe we'll need one more over here. And what we can do now is select all these lovely polygons, drag them down, holding down Alter Option, and then flip them vertically. You know what? I think I have one too many, which is fine. Not a problem. I can just grab these, delete those. And whoop, there we go. And they come nicely into place. Now in the middle, we don't need a mirror in there. That's where all the the fancy equipment and the light sensors and all that fun stuff is definitely going to be sitting. So in the middle, I can just duplicate one over here, but we just basically want a black hole. All right. So we have our, let me actually name this so I know what this is. It's not really a hole, but I'm going to just name it hole for now. And I'm going to select all of these, group them, and call this mirrors. Now, like I mentioned, this doesn't look that exciting, right? But what we want to do is we want to add a bit of a gradient on top of this to make it look a little bit more shiny. Now, if we were to actually add a gradient to all of these different polygons, so if I were to select all these polygons and then add a gradient, this is why I'm doing it separately, right? Linear gradient, you're going to notice it really looks like a beehive, like Fernando was saying, right? Because every single polygon has its own gradient, which is not what we want to do at all. And that's why I'm doing it separately. So in this case, I'm going to select this group like I have here. I'm going to duplicate it. But inside here, I'm actually going to select all of the polygons minus that black hole in the center, which again is not a hole. And I'm going to use the Boolean options at the top one more time to add them all together. So it's one large shape. Now, it looks a little bit strange right now because some of them didn't line perfectly with each other, but that's totally fine. We don't need the border. We don't need the inner shadow. What we do want is we want to change from a solid color to a linear gradient, and we're going to do something like this. So at the top, it's going to be a nice lighter yellow, and at the bottom, it's going to be a little bit of a darker orange, something like that, right? And then once that's in place, what we're able to do is, like we did earlier with the stars, we can experiment with blend modes. And I think in this case, because we like the vibrant look of this particular mirror, we can choose something like overlay. It's getting there, right? And now we can start experimenting one more time with, the colors, and also changing the colors of the actual mirrors behind can certainly make a difference as well, right? Something like that. Now we'll also have to keep in mind that once we add the video on top of this and blend that, we may have to go back one more time and make some additional changes, right? But it's looking pretty good, I think. Now, speaking of the video, I think we're at a point where we can probably proceed with adding that video. So what I'm going to do is we can use the exact same Boolean object that we created for the gradient, and I'm going to duplicate this, Command or Control D. I'm going to call this video, and let's switch it back over to normal, just so we don't have any blending right away. I'm going to change the color to a solid color, just to white. And what we'll want to do, and what's really cool, is we can take a video and place it directly into not just any regular shape like a rectangle or a polygon or whatever. We can also place it into a Boolean object, just like this, right? I did see a question earlier. So Fernando's saying the left column takes up too much space in Adobe XD. Could be like Photoshop. So I would love it in XD if there were, rearrangeable panels, or, can change the size of it. At the moment, it's not possible. Hopefully one day, we'll see. But yeah, I completely agree, Fernando. I would love to see something like that. So again, we can place videos inside of a Boolean object. So if I hop over to Finder one more time, I do have some additional stock assets, again, from Adobe Stock. And I believe this one here, if I'm not mistaken, was from the free library. And at base, you would probably be going very fast to see something like this. And if for anyone who has not used video in XD at the moment, MP4s up to 15 megabytes in file size. Hopefully as time goes on and as the team continues to optimize, we can increase that limit and introduce additional file formats. But MP4s, 15 megabytes, keep that in mind. So I'm going to grab this video and boop, pop it into place. Now, for videos, when I placed it in, it automatically created a mask group. So I'm going to name this video. And then inside of here, we have our actual video file. And then over to the right, we have a few controls for this video. You have the same controls for Lottie animations as well. You can have it play on tap, you can have it play automatically, which we're definitely going to want, or no playback at all. And for videos in particular, Lottie doesn't have this. You can open up this heads-up display where you have additional options. My Adobe XD doesn't have the boop sound effect. I'm going to talk to the engineers, see if we can get some boop sound effects and maybe even some boop animations. So over here, we have some additional controls. We can, of course, scrub the video. We can play the video. But more importantly, for this example, we want to make sure that once the video gets to the end, it's a bit of a long video. I'll get to that in a second. We can loop the playback, so it'll go right back to the beginning. Now, speaking of long videos, if for whatever reason we wanted to trim this video, we can trim it in Adobe XD, which is amazing. When I heard video was coming to XD a while ago, did not expect trimming, right? So trim, I can cut off a little bit at the end. I can cut off some from the beginning. In this case, looking pretty good, so I'm going to leave it as is. Now, if I were to just launch the preview like this, the video is certainly going to play, and it looks fine, right? Doesn't look great. Looks fine. But what we want to do is blend this video with all that magical mirrors that we created in the background. So I do have the entire group selected. You can have the entire mask group, or you can have the actual video itself selected. And in my properties inspector, I'm going to change this over to something like soft light. And all of a sudden, that's going to start blending with the gradients and the mirrors that we created earlier. The borders and the highlights are going to start to come through. We can adjust the opacity if we need to, but let's go ahead and launch this. That's looking a little bit better, right? It's a little bit small, but we'll get to that in a moment, right? Now, what we can do is we can make this a little bit larger, just like this, by just dragging all of this, or we can use 3D transforms, which we're going to get to in just a moment. But one more thing I might want to add to this is, a border on the outside of this particular area, right? So there are a few ways we can do this. We could possibly, duplicate this gradient group again and add a border around it. We could do that. Or we can use an outline stroke. So if I duplicate this gradient, and let's just change this to normal one more time, solid color, and we'll change this to black, right? If I were to simply enlarge this, because of the nature of these mirrors, if you take a look, there's a little bit extra room in the top. It's not really uniform all the way around. That's just because of the size of the mirrors. So what we can do to make our life a little bit easier, is on this entire group, we can add a border. Let me change this to white so we can see exactly what we're doing on the outside, right? So now we're going to have a nice, more uniform border going around the outside, right? We could leave it like this, but what we want to do is really take advantage of styling. So to help with that, under the object menu, we can go down to path and then outline stroke, which is going to allow us to separate that border from everything else. And now we can place this border behind the mirrors, behind the gradient, behind the video, all that stuff. And then we can experiment. Maybe we can add a little bit of a linear gradient. Maybe it's a little bit lighter at the top, a little bit darker at the bottom, right? We can add a bit of a border on the inside. Maybe about 4. Drop that. It's a bit too much. That could do. And then possibly even an inner shadow to add one more highlight. But, it's looking pretty good. So we may not need... maybe we do. I don't know. But something like that. Just to add a little bit more gloss. There we go. That looks pretty good. Kind of happy with it. I might want to just tweak the border a little bit. Maybe darken this down to the bottom a touch. I want the border nice and subtle. Perfect. All right. Our mirror is looking pretty good. But there's one more thing that I do want to add to this particular mirror. I'm going to make sure to group all these elements here. So the video, the gradient, the mirrors, the border, which I should name properly. And I'm going to call this telescope. And the last thing I want to do, just to add a little bit of flair to this, completely optional, you may want to tilt it a little bit or, rotate it a touch. Now, of course, we could just grab one of the corners and it's fine, right? Or we can have some fun with 3D transforms. So I'm going to turn that on. We have this lovely little gizmo that kind of pops up, and this will allow us to just rotate it in both directions. We can also pull it forwards a little bit if we want to make it a little bit larger without actually enlarging the layers themselves. If there was nothing in the background, we can also push it back. Now, of course, it'll go behind those stars that we created earlier, but I think something like this looks pretty interesting, right? And what's wonderful is even after we've 3D transformed this in both directions, we can still launch the preview and the video still plays really nicely. So it just sits over there to the side, rotated with this beautiful gradients, which I might want to brighten up just a little bit. Just a little bit. And since this is so shiny, another optional step, what we can do is, let me duplicate this. I'm going to add one more element here, and this is going to be more of like a highlight. Let's change this to normal for a second. We're going to stick with a linear gradient, but this time, I want to do something like this. White, white, and then in space, would it have something like this? Probably not. but it'll add to that shininess of the telescope, right? Drop it down to about 40, try 40%. Shiny. I'm going to make sure to adjust this a little bit. Something like that. Fernando's asking about 3D transforms in HTML, CSS. It will be, so I don't believe 3D transforms is available in design specs in terms of CSS or HTML. Hopefully one day, but I don't believe it is at the moment. But I do know that 3D transforms is available outside of Adobe XD in CSS, if I'm not mistaken. So you can do something similar, but it wouldn't export perfectly. But you can export this as an image if you do want to use that. All right, Kara, I almost missed Fancy Friday. You're doing NASA. Yes, so we're doing the James Webb Telescope, the landing page. Now I am noticing here that we're definitely kind of overflowing a little bit, which in this case, it may not be too bad. It might not be a huge problem to have it a little bit larger, but you know, we may want to just bring this back just so it lines up a little bit better. Maybe I can position this down here. I mean, there's so many different ways we can position this to make sure it lines up, but you know what? We're gonna leave it as is for now. All right. Faisal is saying, every time I watch live video, I got new ideas. That's amazing. That's why I love doing these things, to hopefully inspire many of you to design something cool. And I do know that NASA, I think, tweeted a while ago, or somebody from NASA tweeted that they're looking to modernize their website. Not necessarily the reason I'm doing this, but there might be a job open there. So if you get inspired by this, maybe find that tweet and, you know, have some fun with it. All right. So we have that looking pretty good. And now we can start working on some smaller elements. Things like, you know, a subheader down here, right? So we might want to do something like, oops, what did I do? I missed it. That's very large. We definitely don't want to do that. Make this quite a bit smaller. Something like, maybe like 32. Now, this typeface that we're using up here, Lust, looks pretty good at the top. The nice large header. But when it gets a lot smaller, like we're doing for this subheader, it's a lot difficult to read. A lot more difficult to read, right? So something like maybe Condor is an interesting typeface that we might want to consider using, right? I believe that's also from Adobe Stock. Let's try regular. All right, so we have our subheader, but we want to make sure that, you know, it doesn't kind of overflow and kind of overlay onto the telescope itself. So I'm going to switch this over to fixed width, or auto height, I should say. And then I'm just going to pull this in a little bit. We'll have fully deployed on the next line, and I can dive in here and maybe really emphasize that it has been fully deployed. Maybe I can bump this up to either bold. Black might be too much. It's not bad, but I think bold could look pretty nice. And then I think regular looks okay here. Medium, maybe? Medium's not too bad. Then I'm going to just bump up the line height just a little bit, maybe to 48. And there we go. Now we have a little bit of a subheader. Now, one more thing I might want to do is maybe right below, you know, for anyone who may have missed the launch, or they have, you know, or they just want to revisit it, right? There might be a call to action to actually watch and revisit that launch. So let's go ahead and drag out this container here. Now a video is 16 by 9. So if I want to make sure that I'm doing that properly, I can do something like 1280 by 720. Definitely too large, but I can just bring this back in. And there we go. We now have a video container. And I'll round out the corners a little bit, somewhere around 8. And then on the inside, what we're going to want to do is have not just a thumbnail, but also we might want a play button. I think we can get a little bit creative with this as well. So if I hop over to Finder one more time, I do have some images from NASA's gallery, and I think this one could be kind of fun. They looked very excited about this launch. And I was considering, images like this one and this one as well, but these images in particular are very light in nature. And I just found it a little bit difficult to place anything on top of it, whether it's text or a play button or anything like that. Definitely have to darken it a little bit. So we're going to stick with this. Now, speaking of darkening the image a little bit, depending on what you put on top of it, you may want to consider something like a very subtle overlay. So if I duplicate this image here, Command and Control D, I'm going to switch this over to a linear gradient. Both colors are going to be black, but the color at the top is going to be 0% opacity, just so we have a little bit of a gradient at the bottom, which will allow us to still see the image back there, but also place something on top of it. And I may also want a little bit of a border on the image in the background. Maybe a subtle border, possibly on the outside. Right. And then I might just drop this a touch. Perfect. And then the final thing is right on top, we're going to want a play button. Now, of course, we can go ahead and, do something like this and add a polygon on top. Right. And it looks okay. We can add some fancy color, maybe blue or something. Maybe we can even round out the corners a little bit. And it looks fine, right? But we have the perfect shape sitting in front of us to get a little bit creative. We've got this lovely beehive honeycomb thing that all of you are calling it, right? Of course, it's the mirrors of the telescope. We can use something like that. We can get a little bit creative with this. So I'm going to get rid of that. We're going to definitely keep the play button because that's pretty generic when it comes to play buttons, right? So what we're going to do instead, add a polygon. We're going to set the sides to 6 like we did earlier with the mirror. And we're going to, we're not going to use all the mirrors like we did in the telescope, which I think is like 18 or something, or maybe even more than that. But we're just going to have a few of them. Maybe we'll add a little bit of separation here. We'll duplicate this one over. And then duplicate this down, flip it, and do something like that. And I'm going to group this and call this play. And I can grab this guy here and pop it in the middle, right? Now, I think what we could do to, because we definitely have that overlay in the background, we can add a little bit of color. We don't want to add as much color as the telescope over here. We don't want that crazy gradient. But I think what we could do, Wade said that could be a fun loading animation. I'm getting ideas, Wade. I like that. Won't have time to do that today, but maybe after the stream, I'm gonna have some fun with that. So what we could do is just add a little bit. So maybe up here, we're going to do, a nice bright yellow. And then maybe on the sides, we can sample this color and maybe just darken it a touch. And then down here, sample this. Maybe we'll add a little bit of orange. And then at the bottom, darken that even more. So it's got this kind of, fake solid gradient going on here, right? And then we can also, maybe we can actually just add a bit of a border to this. Oops, maybe on the outside. Just so these are all connected, it adds a little bit of separation from that background. And then behind it, we can also add one more black square, or not square, but whatever the shape is. Hexagon, possibly? I don't know what it is. It's something. There we go. Let's see, where's that play button? I want to make sure to name this properly. And maybe I'll just drop the opacity a little bit, just so it's not too strong. There we go. And make sure that this is positioned in the center of this video. Perfect. And then if we wanted to, we can also add some text because we have that overlay down there. We can just type out something like relive the historic launch. Now, we do have about 5 minutes left. So what we can do, let me show you how to turn this particular video, which I'm going to make sure to group all these elements and move this down a little bit so there's a bit of breathing room. Let me show you how to turn this video into more of an interactive component. So you might want to, actually click on this and then something would happen. So to do that, what we want to do is create a component from these elements. Now I do have them all grouped and selected in my layers panel. So I'm going to create a component either within my properties inspector over to the right, my document assets, or the Command and Control K shortcut. And we already have our default state looking pretty good. Essentially, we want this to look like this. We want the play button, a little bit of an overlay. We might also want a hover effect. So if I go ahead and press the plus button one more time, I can create a hover state. And maybe I'll just, bump this up a little bit just to add a very subtle hover effect, right? So we can play that. And we have a little hover effect right here, right? Nothing too crazy. But what we want to do is create one more that will allow the video to actually play. Now I don't have a video of the launch at my disposal, but we'll use something random. So I'm going to press new state, call this video. And what we can do is grab these elements here, make them larger. We're going to make sure, actually we're going to run into a problem with 3D transforms, but we'll deal with that in a moment. Let's make this larger so it lines up. Now the play button, I am going to move to the middle, but we actually want to hide this. So I'm just going to, and we want to hide this as well. Let me hide the telescope for a second. There we go. And then we don't need the overlay, so I'm going to drop that to 0% opacity. And I'm going to grab an image or a video and place this in here. Now I will note that because there is an image already masked in this rectangle, it won't accept a video. So we'll want to make sure to just change that. And let's find a random video. This one could work, and place that right in there. I want to make sure to play automatically. Perfect. Okay. Now I did mention that because 3D transforms is enabled on this particular object and it's moved forward on the Z-axis, it's always going to be above everything else, right? So in this case, we might want to just drop this back down to 0. And maybe just enlarge it. Or just keep it as is, it's fine, right? So now we have our hover state, we have our video, which is still, what did I do? Oh, it's still okay. There we go, right? Now, one thing we may want to consider is because we have this telescope, the mirrors back here, it might be a little bit difficult to see the video. So in this case, we can dive in here and maybe just add an overlay behind it. And just drop the opacity a little bit, maybe to, 85%, somewhere around there. Move this up. Perfect. All right, so we have our default state, we have our hover state, and we have our video. We want to make sure that we can wire this up. So from either the default state or the hover state, I'm going to make sure to select this entire video. I'm going to click on the blue handle over to the right. We are going to, we could do auto animate, might not be necessary, so we'll do a simple transition. Maybe we'll do, we'll go to our video, and then we'll do a little bit of a dissolve. Maybe ease out should be fine. We don't want to go too much, so maybe 0.4. And then we can launch. We've got our landing page with our lovely video in our mirror. We can hover over this particular element down here, and we can click to launch our video. And assuming we had, a video of the actual launch, that would start playing right here. Now, we don't have any way to get back, so you would definitely be able to put like a close button either up at the top or, somewhere else on this page, and then redirect that to the default state, right? I don't know if we have time for that, but we can easily, actually, you know what? Let's just do this. We'll just put the word close. It's not very nice, but we're going to run with it. Prototype, click, go back to our default state. So one more time, we can hover, we can click, the video plays, and if we want to go back, we can close. And there we go. So that's going to wrap things up for me for today. Big thank you to everyone who has tuned in here on Behance and on Twitter. Stick around. Kyle T. Webster's coming up in just a few moments over at behance.net/Adobe Live. I will be back next week. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you then.